And then when it opens, be sure to close the window for the YouTube because it'll echo. Oh.
Okay, maybe I saw run through the camera.
I mean, we struggle to see everything, just minimize this big screen.
McKenna, I have a research paper I want to email you from George Mason that they just put out, kind of related to that.
Cool. Yeah, I'm curious if it's one I've read already. You should send
I
it
think it just came out in May.
to me. Cool. I
so-
just have real, but yeah, we can read later. But yeah.
I think this is on, there you go. Right, okay. I didn't bring my glasses, so I can't read anything on the screen, which is great. Do we have anyone from our commission? Is it Jenna? I see. She says it's so blind. Okay, all right, well, we'll call to order. It's 4:32. We have 4 of us in person, so we may have some additional commissioners joining online, but we're at the forum. We will begin with citizens to be heard. Is there anyone here to speak for citizens to be heard? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to approval of meeting minutes from the June 12th meeting, which I was not present at, but I watched on YouTube. Are there any comments related to the minutes?
I have a minor comment. Oh boy, now it's always hard to say where it is. It's right above future considerations.
Okay,
And I just want to know, and I should have been able to go on and check. It says Commissioner Mancuso notes that Krista Sloan commented via chat that her developer thinks it will be profitable for them. And I had a question about that chat. Didn't they put in a sort of different figure for something there? Yeah.
In the
You know, I don't
chat?
remember that, like 30% would be,
I think what she was saying was that they reviewed what we put into the draft PUD language in that table. And that, she reviewed that with the clients and that scenario would work for them.
oh, good.
It would pencil for them, is because we were kind of wondering if I think the question was, have we had any developer input on this? And should we maybe reach out to some developers and find out if it would pencil?
And that's the way this reads. Good.
Yep. So maybe we could clarify that. if we
I
want.
was worried that she said some other percentage.
Oh,
worked.
oh, Okay,
But if this is the case, that's exactly
yeah,
That was my
What-
recollection as well.
yeah, okay.
good. Excellent. Okay. I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
I second.
motion and second, all in favor, raise your hand. Seeing none opposed, it's unanimous that we pass our minutes. We have no presentation, so we'll move back to county commission update.
You know, so I'm not gonna say too much because you're gonna talk about vacation. So, I think the only thing I'll kind of mention is I went to Castle Valley on Friday night.
She was really good.
I don't know about that. I kept looking at OB like, help me, help me. You know, I think there's a lot of concern, and I don't know if this is something that the county commission pursues, the planning commission pursues, but I think there's a lot of concern about, you know, what Sitla can and cannot do. And they're proposing an overnight accommodation overlay out there, and it's fairly substantial. And it's a leasing of Sitla, so I think that's an interesting aside, and so I just think it's something that we need to kind of start looking at. Do you want to add anything to that? And I think to me, that's the rub.
No, it was interesting. Mary Beth, one of our
Yes.
ex planning and land use committee people, said that so far Sitla has never used
Right.
their right to overturn a local community, that they probably are reluctant to do it. It's not very good publicity. They may not like that favorability. And then there's this stuff of one judge in the Lineback decision suggested that a leasing may not be able to do it. And there is Sitla saying if they're treated fairly, then they're going to follow the land use stuff that we impose. I imagine that the county commission will be fair with them. and probably demonstrably. So that's gonna be a hard argument for them to make. But I think it's a court case waiting to be had when somebody actually says, well, we just can't let you do that.
Right.
And the time that they might get turned over is if they decided on the Sitla land in our valley to make a 30-story building
Right.
in a residential area. Courts might think that's overreach, but who knows what will happen eventually. But I do think it's just not a decided issue fully.
Right, I just think it's something that needs to be on our radar. I know this company you were saying is in how many litigations right now?
Oh, I don't really, it's interesting because I've tried to stay away from being a member of the very small coalition of,
Right,
well, maybe there's 8 or 9 core people in it. And then there must have been 50 people
yeah,
at this kind
yeah,
of function. She mentioned, I think Mary Beth mentioned, maybe there's 3 or 4 places where they've tried to sue them.
yeah. I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I won't make Opie talk to this because he's a resident of Castle Valley, but to me, it's completely out of the character of that valley. It's right in the middle of specifically winter range of deer and elk. And it's right at their source of water specifically for the creek so there's a lot of concerns for me personally about this development. I just think it's.
Could we, during future considerations, revisit the somewhat tabled item of separating glamping use from camping use in the land use code? Because I would love to,
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
yeah, that's a great, yeah.
We do have a legal review request for this specific topic with the attorney's office, so.
Right,
I need to probably check in on that and see where things are at, but we did want to get that like official attorney opinion because,
right,
because as you're saying, it could be, if it went down the path of not approving an OAO zone, then that would be where it would get challenged.
yeah, right.
So, yeah.
It is also interesting because of course it is political in many ways. So they may come, you may get a legal opinion. Sitla can do what it wants to do. But Sitla, of course, is also saying, well, we're gonna do what the county says to do if we're reasonable with them. So it is an interesting thing. The Harry Holland, who was kind of leading this meeting, said to a question, he said, well, it's a Sitla decision. And I kind of said, well, hold on, there's a lot of decisions
Yeah.
between them, and all of those decisions are important, whether they get water,
Right,
which they may well, I think they will probably get water, what the county commission decides, because it's an independent body that gets to make these decisions, and then what Sitla decides they'll do with that decision, but all of those decisions are important.
For sure.
That's about it. Great, and then we'll come back to a livelier topic in just a moment. So, resolution, shall we move on? Anything else?
I mean, I would just say, and I'll touch on this at the HCHO's update, but the Peak View amended development application or whatever, development agreement, sorry, was approved. And that was a big kind of milestone for that project to move forward. So,
so hopefully they'll move forward.
yeah.
I drive by it almost every day, and it's good to see those houses come up. Wonderful. Let's move on to our resolution to rename the private access tract Antrobus Way to Sky Place within the Antrobus subdivision. Jenna. Oh, and I'll note for the record that Tony has arrived. There's 5 of us.
I said I saw you shoot past.
So this item is in consideration of a resolution, request to rename the private access tract Antrobus Way to Sky Place within the Antrobus subdivision. The previously named county council approved the Antrobus minor records survey on September 3rd in 2019. Subdivision is located on the south side of Juniper Lane. 2088 Antrobus Way is the location of the Antrobus's single-family dwelling. And the two other lots, 2068 and 2024, are currently undeveloped. Mark and Mary Antrobus, the original developers of the subdivision, are the current owners of all three parcels making up the subdivision and have requested to change the name from Antrobus Way Private Access Tract to Sky Place. Per county code title 1208 080, existing streets by county, the county by resolution may change, rename, or name an existing or newly established street within the limits of the county at any time upon recommendation of the county planning commission, after consultation with the county planning and zoning chairperson and any other governmental agency directly affected. So we discussed it with the county roads department, also with the recorder's office, and no one was opposed to the request. So you'll see the Antrobus plat up on top there, and we've also drafted the resolution approving that if recommended tonight. Any questions?
To make a motion? I don't think so. There's a motion on the table, doesn't mean we have to vote on it.
I'm gonna send a favorable recommendation to the county commission to approve the proposed resolution renaming private tract access Antrobus Way to Sky Place.
Second.
Okay, motion by McKenna, second by Tony. Do you have any additional comments?
I did have one question. Have they said why they want to change it?
They didn't give a rationale for it, no.
Okay.
No, it was just a simple email request
Mhm.
to change the name.
I kind of recall that they were saying they didn't intend for it to be named after them. And they ultimately, I think it was like they hadn't figured out what the name would be by the time it was recorded or whatever it was approved. And so I think eventually they just figured out what the name should be and wanted to.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the motion by McKenna, seconded by Tony. All in favor, say aye. None opposed, that is unanimous. Okay, lovely.
I would only comment that my wife and I didn't know what we were gonna name our second child. And they said, well, he'll leave this hospital named Baby O'Brien. If you don't, and then you'll have to go through a name change. So we decided.
That's tough. Okay, so now we have some discussion items, beginning with status of various land use code updates, led by Elisa.
I'm gonna try to share my screen really quick. Sorry, I'm a little behind here on getting.
Citizen planners back here. They're doing so good. They are doing really well. Computer helps a lot.
Okay, here we go. So I just have some slides here. I'm gonna go through. Oh, yeah.
I'm so
I
sorry.
know, it's
Thank
fine.
you.
I'm the same way. Okay, so land use code updates that we've been working on, the MFR 45 density bonus. We originally had planned to implement this after the future land use plan was adopted, but it ended up getting fast tracked in order to accommodate a developer that was proposing to go through with a LIHTC application, which is the low income housing tax credit program. And that deadline for them to get a rezone approved and get that zoning verification letter that said that they had that use was September 1st. So we were trying to accommodate that timeline. But just as of, I think it was the week before last, right, when we were getting ready to, whether or not we we're gonna put it on the commission's agenda for the special meeting, they reached out and let us know that they found out they were not going to be able to go forward with their LIHTC application regardless this year, that they want to do it next year. So, so with that information, we basically are putting this on hold because we feel that while it was pretty close to being finalized and it was in legal review and we were getting some good feedback from the attorney's office. I think we could have pulled it off, but it felt rushed and I would rather have this part of the comprehensive land use code update that we've planned to do, which includes the other MFR density bonuses. So the ones that we were gonna look at for MFR 35 and MFR 18, that we're gonna maybe have different requirements for the incentive. So, so that's what I'm proposing, to put this on hold for now and then go back to kind of focusing really on getting the future land use plan finalized and then working with our consultants, which we still have a lot in that budget for working with them on this specific thing, which was in their scope of work originally anyway. So that's where that's at right now.
Is the current, as we've talked at very high levels about certain density bonuses in the future land use map being connected with certain incentives or requirements, is the intent that MFR would carry the requirement to only be this low income level? So if it were
Well-
included in the future land use plan, a different developer couldn't swoop in and, you know, circumvent or replace this project.
As far as the timing goes for the LIHTC, there's,
No, I'm so sorry. I'm saying, I think in general, having a developer willing to come to the table and
yes,
voluntarily restrict these units to serve our lowest income group in our community. It is the intent to ensure that that is what happens with this type of density bonus with the
Yes.
future land use plan.
oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we, in order to make that possible for a developer to apply for a rezone, we have to get through those land use code updates.
Sure.
Right, but so first I wanted to finish the future land use plan, which has been getting pushed back more and more with all these other initiatives. So I think we'll be good to go back to the original plan and work with BAE to figure out what those different requirements would be for each of those different levels of incentive. Yeah, and then we'll be working on that with you guys more. Any other questions on that? That one's just on hold. The PUD workforce housing density bonus, we had this at our planning commission meeting last time in our last meeting on June 12th as a public hearing, and this was, this is being brought forward in order to increase the effectiveness of the PUD density bonus that we currently have in the land use code, which is an affordable housing incentive or density bonus incentive. And so what we've been asked by previous developers, and we've also thought about this ourselves, is why wouldn't we have one for a workforce housing option? So the developer could opt into restricting the units for workforce instead of income restricted. Okay. So that one is, that one did get the planning commission's sent a favorable recommendation at that meeting. And so that's in legal review and moving forward. So our next step would be, once legal review is complete, we'll go to the county commission for the public hearing there. I would hope we could get that by the end of July, but see, maybe early August. Any questions on that one? Okay. The water conservation, water rebate program requirements that we want to incorporate into the land use code. We have this on our agenda as a discussion item at our last meeting. And I just wanted to tag this on here because I was hoping we could get this in front of you guys, in front of this body quickly as a public hearing, but we are still working to draft the language and working in consultation with WISA and the city of Moab to ensure compatibility and consistency. So we'll finalize the land use code language and we'll be bringing this to the PC for a public hearing in July. I think this should be really simple. I don't want it to be, yeah, political or anything. It's just kind of a straightforward.
It had the word water in it.
Right, I know. That's why I'm saying that. It can be,
Am I wrong?
but they're pretty reasonable requirements for new development to do water-wise landscaping. And then, Article 3, accessory structures, ADUs and temp uses. So this was the update that we had included. We actually ended up putting a lot into this update, many changes all at once. And it went through planning commission back in the fall of 2022, I believe, but it got stalled out in legal review. And then we had the transition between the attorneys and we just have not picked it back up. I want to I think we should probably have a discussion, bring this back to PC and just make sure that what we're trying to do is, I think the ADU is a really straightforward update that needs to happen like last year, should have been done. But what was probably holding it up was the temp uses, and that was all like the film permit stuff and like, I think it just, at this point, I'm not sure if it's still something that we want to include in this update for the temporary use permits for filming. I mean, that kind of was opening up a whole can of worms with working with the film commission, which they already have a process that they go through, and we were kind of, so I that's how this code update is written right now with all of that in there. And I just, at this point, I think we might want to take that out for now and just go for the ADU and accessory structures.
It seemed a little mishmashed even at the time.
Yeah.
And
There was like this big push to get a temporary use permit process in place for the Cosmo film and all of that, but it ended up, I don't know how, if it worked out okay, if we still want to do that, or if we need to have a temporary use permit, but I think that's still a discussion. At this point.
Coster is one of those words, like, it's like the pickleball thing. If I hear it one more time, I'm gonna turn it off. I'm gonna lose that.
saying you want to play pickleball with Kevin Costner.
Right.
I think, for the sake of moving this forward in one way or another, would it be possible to get a straw vote from the planning commission on the interest of peeling off the ADU regulations from Article 3 and ask the commission to come back with a direction one way or another?
Yeah, or I think we could probably get that straw poll vote and, well, yeah, you're right. We should probably check in with the commission on.
Or from us, or from you guys.
I would imagine there would be consensus to move forward, but I mean, one way or another, since we have this, may want to bring this, I would love to see this come up. I would like to see Article 3, the ADU aspect move forward. If the commission wanted to just be aware of this, and if there was any concern, let us know. Otherwise, let's move forward.
Okay.
If there's,
And would you keep accessories, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think the only
but
thing
it's
we were
getting
gonna-
rid of the temporary uses.
I think the only major change in the accessory structures was to allow detached garages to have a reduced setback in small lot residential where you have a pretty small
Yeah.
size lot. And like, if you end up having to do the wider setbacks, your garage is like in the middle of your yard kind of thing. So that came from something that Bill Holst had been talking about that needed to change, so. Yeah.
So since since that whole Article 3 change predated me,
Mhm.
where can I go to review that?
I can send it out. I can send this back out to y'all so you can give it a little read
Yeah, I'd
through.
like to take a look.
we should have the red lines in the packet from, gosh, that would have been,
That's what I'd like
October?
to
Yeah, I
see.
think it was October or something like that.
I don't know why I could pull that out of my head. I couldn't tell you my birthday, but.
That's pretty good. Pretty impressive.
Or not.
I can get that to you.
Depressing.
Just made it up.
Yeah.
Let's send those red lines around. Is there anyone who feels strongly against this approach? Okay, so let's make sure the commission gets this updated at their next meeting and sans any pushback. I'd love to, it should move forward pretty quickly since it's already gone through review.
Yeah, we spent quite a bit of time on this stuff. It also could be an opportunity to look at what Aaron wanted to bring up and put on a future agenda was the possibility of changing the deed restriction for ADUs, which right now, the main restriction is that one of the units has to be occupied by the owner. So he kind of was mentioning at our last meeting that possibly does that need to remain? Is there a good reason for that too.
That's an interesting question. You can think of a couple of reasons you might not want to do that, right?
Right,
I reached out to Ronnie about that
yeah.
after we had that meeting. Is now a good time to like?
Why don't we get through the rest of the presentation and maybe bring that up in future considerations and have a deeper topic, and that way we can direct staff.
Actually, you know what, if we could get the red line sent around, we could probably have kind of an all-encompassing conversation about that and any other things we might see too. What do you think?
And I'll ask the commission tomorrow, we'll get it up.
Okay.
What- Let's come back to this in future considerations. So we have two. See, I can remember when the meeting was. I can't remember something I said 30 minutes ago for future considerations. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about anything we would or wouldn't want to have covered in that discussion so staff can prepare, and anything we've learned about it, and then
Good idea.
tentatively.
The other thing you're thinking of was the land bank definition.
Why, she asked. I'm
I don't know how I remember that.
Thank you. All right, I'm making a note in my notes. Okay.
Okay, great. And then, of course, we have the HGHO revisions. So we have another agenda discussion item on this, so we go in more depth, but basically, we've had so far 3 public workshops on this topic. We've begun to draft the land use code revisions, the red line version of the section 4.7, as well as the rules and regulations. And so our next steps is to bring those draft revisions to PC at our next meeting on July 10th. And then we would have the discussion at the commission on the draft revisions, and then we'll go into the we'll finalize the revisions, submit to legal review, and then get that to the public hearings in August. Seems a little ambitious maybe for August, but I would hope. We'll see. So that's all I have for the land use code updates that we're working on. Yeah, anybody have any other comments on that?
So, our next topic is on update at the HGO workshop. I mentioned coming back to future considerations. Do we want to stall now on the ADU conversation and get that out of the way before we move into HGHO?
I'm fine with that.
Okay,
Piggyback on what was just talked about.
just now that we're. So, Makeda, you mentioned that you would have a conversation with Ronnie, and then, Jerry, you had some thoughts on what else we might want to potentially bring to the table for discussion. So let's talk through those two things. Makeda, you want to go first?
Sure. I don't have that much to report, but I reached out to Ronnie after last meeting. I kind of talked to Lisa. I was like, oh, that'd be helpful if I reached out to her. So I reached out to her, and she was basically saying, she's meeting with the city also about their deed restrictions relating to ADUs. And basically, it sounds like there hasn't been any actual rejections of lending so far, but mostly because that hasn't come up yet, it sounds like. And she said, and I can send this out, her exact words, but it just sounds like because it's already in our land use code, that the deed restriction is kind of just an extra gumming up of the process that could cause like lenders to reject because it would require them to validate renter occupancy and all this stuff. And so she basically was like, it's just gonna cause a lot of frustration and potential not lending, and it doesn't really make sense because it already exists in the land use code, so owners know they can't do that anyways. But she said she'd be happy to put our heads together and see what we can do to make sure we're holding homeowners accountable and still not putting them at risk for a loan. So she's open to collaboration with us. We wanted to, yeah, that's kind of the gist and stuff.
Jerry, did you have anything you wanted to specifically talk about, or are you
What they
interested?
use, I just would like to review the
Yeah.
red lines, basically,
Um,
see what the changes are.
The substantive change was a change in setbacks.
Reduce setbacks again for certain zones that made sense, and if you didn't go 2 stories high. But so if you're just a 1-story ADU, then you could get a reduced setback.
Oh, okay.
And then the other thing was increasing or defining better the square footage max for ADU. Right now, it's 1,000 square feet, but we don't define how to measure it, if it's an internal measurement or external.
Okay.
So we've defined it in this update with being an external measurement, but 1,200 square feet max. And that's, I believe, what the city also does. Is 1,200.
In terms of the setback changes, anecdotally, we heard from people in public meetings, and then I've also seen in just sort of comments in the public that what seems like a fairly minor change actually pretty significantly adjusted the cost structure for homeowners who wanted to construct an ADU. And so, not talking large developers here, talking a single person trying to build an ADU in the backyard, that there was fairly broad enthusiasm. Some requests to go further, but generally broad enthusiasm. I know in terms of the deed restrictions, again, anecdotally, I'm aware of at least one person in the city who was found to be in non-compliance because they rented both units of the duplex and the ADU. And it caused them quite a bit of grief. I don't know what ended up coming of that, but this person is a business owner locally and a very small business owner, and I know it was a challenge. So I do think it's something we should consider, right? But I don't also want it to gum up the process of getting changes that are already reviewed and voted on moving forward. So
Yeah.
would staff be open to potentially discussing them together, but separating them as far as moving things forward and peeling out the Article 3 changes related to accessory structures and ADUs, having this conversation around deed restrictions, but not necessarily doing a positive or negative recommendation on moving forward with that related to.
Yeah, it could be, we could set it up so that there could be like a version A and version B of this land use code update that we could vote on. One that includes getting rid of the deed restriction and one that keeps it there. Yeah, maybe something like that.
And I think that would also give us the ability to table the more potentially controversial aspect for further study, but not dismiss it out of hand. And
So there was also some conversation about not having a need for a deed restriction because it's covered in the land use code, right?
As far as it's covered in the land use code that you can't rent them out for short-term rental. That's pretty obvious, but I think in the land use code, it actually says that the ADU has a deed restriction in order to.
Yeah, it's tacked on like the one sentence at the end of that occupancy requirement, so you still need that
It would
one
still
sentence.
need, yeah, exactly. I think it would still just need to be modified in order to make it a requirement of the land use code, but not necessarily adding the thing of having to have a deed restriction.
Okay, I think it'd be good to review both of those when the red line comes out.
Yeah.
And see how the two work together. And I agree, a deed restriction turns lenders and buyers off.
Right.
And if we can cover it a different way and effectively do it, why not do it, right? Right. Yeah, if we could review those, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I will send them out
Okay.
tomorrow for sure.
And we'll plan on that for a discussion item or an action item in our next meeting. Any other comments on that topic? Cool, let's move to review of the HCHO workshop.
So I'm gonna just go over the slides that we had at the commission's meeting on the 20th, or the workshop that was prior to the regular meeting. So this was this came out of the first workshop, actually, the June 6th workshop, but I was kind of reviewing it with everybody at this last meeting. So we had the discussion of what was the original intent of the HCHO, and we went around and had each commissioner provide their input, especially those who were actually there and present during that time when it was adopted. So largely, the commissioners kind of agreed and were commenting on how there was the original intent to provide housing opportunities for workforce, but not just for occupancy, but to actually have opportunity to buy homes and not have to compete on the real estate market with second home buyers. And so that was kind of the general consensus. Commissioner Winfield did comment that the program is very strict and therefore it wasn't very popular originally, and that it really caused the whole thing to kind of be very slow moving, and which wasn't the original intent, but was definitely an effect of, that was his kind of perspective on it. So this is the overall gist of that.
I think it was, yeah, just that I think Elisa did a great job of backing up and reiterating the original intent. I think that was really important, specifically coming from Mary and Kevin and Evan, because they were there, they were on the ground, whether it was county commissioner or planning commissioner. And so, yeah, I mean, that's all I'll state. I think that, to me, really came through very clear. You know, I don't think we want to lose sight of what that intent was.
It's a shame we don't have YouTube recordings from the presentation of applicants, because I think it would also provide some context to the framing and the mindset of the presentation.
Right.
Because I know at least one of the applicants at the time, one of the larger developments, very specifically said in front of the planning commission, we want to put these houses on the market for less than market rates. We want to solve for people who can't afford homes. They were very clear. They wanted it for residents only. And
Right.
so it's been,
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
it is what it is. We don't
Yeah,
have those recordings, but, yeah, interesting.
Okay, we have audio recordings.
Do
We-
it from county commission.
We did, for full planning commission, we definitely.
As well?
had- Yeah,
Mm.
I remember coming across some that were kind of older. I don't know, we
Yeah.
could look into it.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah. So at we actually reviewed this information, at our last planning commission meeting and at the county commission workshops. I've kind of just been updating it as I get more data. But essentially, of those HGHO projects that have hit the market, or, you know, have already gone through in previous years where they were able to sell, build their homes and sell them. So we've got, units sold to date, 20 total out of the 59 that, are basically the total number of units, but only 49 of those are actually HGHO restricted. So, of the 49 HGHO restricted units, 20 of those, have sold. And that includes, some of the Murphy Flats units that are pre-sold. Units that were retained by the developer. So this happened in a few of the projects, or at least two here. So, that's the Hawks subdivision. They still own those units, but they rent them out or have family members, I guess. And then the Peakview, they held on to 8 units, and rent those out to qualified households. So there's 11 of those total. So really, there's, 31 units that are occupied by HGHO qualified households, if you put those together. Yeah, and that's the number that matches up right here with the number that HASU has gone through and qualified, and that are actually going through with HGHO units, are already in them. So, and then we did get some information on sale price or listed price. So right now, the Murphy Flats numbers here, those are listed price. And then these ones are the Starbucks was an actual sale price, and then also with Peakview, those are sale prices, a range of sale prices. So, interesting. And then this just shows all of those projects that have not been built out yet. So that totals 253 units, and of those, there's 204 that are deed restricted for HGHO. And those are, basically, we can say now, thankfully, that all of those projects are through, for the most part, through the planning process, except for Peakview, which will now be just doing their final plat phases, which is a pretty generic process. It shouldn't be too time consuming. We've already got their phase 2 final plat underway with DRT, so they're already moving along. But yeah, and then Desert Soul was the other one that we were waiting on, and they just were able to get their revised civil plans approved. And now they're gonna be reporting their final plat in the next couple days. So then, at the June 6th workshop, at the end of that, there was a kind of a discussion of why all these other projects, these bigger ones, have been taking so long. And so the commission, a couple of commissioners wanted to have a little bit more of an in-depth review of what the timeline was for each of these projects. So I summarized some of those, some of the kind of milestones of each of these projects. And I don't know if we want to really go into them. I think we all kind of know a big delay was initially the, some of the litigation that was happening, and then that moved right into COVID and that whole year. And then there was the transition between the old planning staff and new planning staff, and that's getting on board and up to speed. So, but at this point, like I said, they're all over the finish line with planning and zoning review, except for Peakview. And then Community Rebuilds has their application, but they're just, it's a couple, 4 units or something. Yeah. Again, this is just kind of going into the timeline of Desert Soul. And then Viewgate Terrace. This one definitely had more delays because of the engineering aspects of their injection well. And then we moved into the prioritized revisions. So reviewing what we had discussed at the June 6th workshop. There was broad consensus on removing the requirement for a developer or investor who is building the project. And even though this is kind of almost a little too late for this to be useful, it might still be helpful in terms of whether Viewgate or Desert Soul or one of the other ones ends up being sold to a new developer who's going to build it out. So this one had broad consensus to go forward with, removing the requirement to be an actively employed household, and then removing the ownership restriction for multifamily apartment developments, and clarifying in the land use code that those units would remain restricted for occupancy, but the developer, owner, or manager of an apartment complex does not have to be a Grand County entity or qualified as APH. And then the other consensus item was expanding the worker eligibility to San Juan County within the 84532 zip code. There was a discussion of maybe even expanding it beyond 84352, but it was kind of squashed. I think. The general, everybody was in agreement that we just would go to the county, just not the county line, but a little bit further from the county line in North Central Valley. And then we also wanted to tack on the requirement in the land use code, or at least the rules and regulations, to say that going forward, that the development needs to include just disclose their sales price, so we can keep track of that and continue to evaluate the program. And then, so these were the items that we talked about quite a bit. We didn't get too far into the accessory dwelling units. Again, that was, but these were all kind of split. I think there was more interest in pursuing the self-employed eligibility requirement and maybe modifying that, maybe looking at that. I don't know how much there was that much interest in actually doing much for the remote worker. But these two were kind of, there was some discussion as to how they're a little bit related and they almost could be the same. So it was, we left it at basically, I was going to go ahead and create a draft redlined copy of the land use code and incorporate proposed changes based on the consensus that I could gather, and we'll have another workshop. So, yeah. But I would maybe open it up to discussion on these items and see if you have any feedback for staff on what you would think about, for example, lowering the percentage of local clients to 50%. But maybe with proof that they have residency here in Grand County or San Juan County for 5 years, a minimum of 5 years. Or
Yeah.
even,
Yeah, any feedback you
Yeah.
guys want to give to the commission, that would help. And I will state that I thought Laura did a really good job. I think multiple commissioners, at least the way I felt, were like, oh, they're not making it through the eligibility, right? And Laura made it clear that, you know, she obviously doesn't know how many people you lose prior to them coming to HASU, but basically you've only had one person, is that right? Come through and not.
Yeah, there's just not really a point to apply if you know that you can't.
Right. So, yeah, yeah. That was good feedback.
And I'm probably right, the idea about self-employed and remote workers and this percentage is, it's important that we maybe prioritize people who work and give service to people in the community to be eligible. And then the question is, what's the right percent here?
right, and
And of course, how long they've been here.
Right.
yeah,
I would think, building off what Odie just said before it slips out of my paddle frame, that a self-employed resident, working out of their home is more likely to have local clients. And therefore, maybe we help them out with a slightly lower percentage of like local, 50% local clients, whereas a remote worker is less likely to have local clients. And so if we're trying to incentivize long-term members of the community who have been here and deserve housing, the remote worker percentage might stay where it is.
Okay, which is 75, yeah.
Which is 75, right?
Yep.
We want remote worker, like, you could be a remote worker and have 0 clients and
Right.
move here 3 months ago,
Yeah,
right? And that's the kind of qualification we're trying to avoid.
Yep.
Whereas you could be self-employed.
Yep.
Right, and be here for quite a long time.
right.
And, I don't know, maybe you're in refrigeration, and so you gotta draft your Grand Junction law. Right, and so help that person out, because
Yeah.
it's not their fault, all the helium is a DJ, not OEM.
Right. And can you remind me, right now, the remote worker and self-employed with the current percentages as it stands, does that also include the proof of residency, the 3 to 5 years?
no, that's not the way it's worded right now in the land use code, so that would be,
There's also nothing about remote work.
oh, that's right, the remote worker
Yeah, right.
was something that we tacked on as a possibility of allowing, but with those stipulations of 75% or more local clients. So, but the self-employed requirement is in the land use code right now with the stipulation of 75% or more local clients. And we did have, that was the one person that did have to turn away, was somebody who fit that description, self-employed, but she could not prove that her clients, or she knew that her clients were not.
Yeah,
gonna
and
be-
she's
it was
been
like
here for
20
10 years
Maybe
or something, right?
20%.
Yeah, that person has been here for a while.
Yeah.
A self-employed person who maybe has their own LLC is also paying like business taxes.
I know, we
registered in the
stated
county.
that.
Well,
Yeah,
the thing is-
we brought that up.
Not to get too much in the weeds, but like self-employment, you don't technically have to have an LLC,
You
so
don't
like
But you're.
this person, and then it got into a whole different conversation about like what constitutes a business. Because if you have an LLC, then you're automatically
Local
have a
business.
business license in Grant County. And so then you can use that, but what if your LLC doesn't necessarily serve like
Right.
the entirety of the Grand County population? So I don't know, that's a different kind of word.
But
that
that was brought up, that, yeah,
um,
somebody like
don't
that
wanna
is
get
paying a lot of
into,
local
but-
tax.
Laura, can I ask you, or Laura or Lisa, you might have a perspective on this. In terms of explaining why these projects aren't coming on all the way online as fast as we might hope. Some of that pressure is it's too expensive to build out the projects. Some of that pressure is people just don't want to buy them. Which of those is the driving force right now?
I don't think it's that people don't want to buy them. I just don't think we have enough that are built out yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then I firmly believe that the self-employed, if we can support longtime members of our community to get them into housing, and in so doing are able to bring these projects online, which allow for the multiple factor of all these other units opening up, or, you know, I mean, how many self-employed people have worked here for 3 to 5 years are trying to buy a house and want to buy one of these homes right now, given we've only had one person turned away, even if, you know, 90% of people are being turned away, that's still a very small number. And we know there is an unmet need at a much higher rate in this community. Like the laws of supply and demand would say, if leaning into bullet 1 can make these projects viable, the overall net benefit to the community and particularly the workers in our community is positive. So that's, I would feel very strongly about
Maybe
lowering the,
loosening
I
up
would loosen
yeah.
it, I would go bullet 1B, excuse me, like,
Maybe even less than 50%.
I would go to 25, 20,
25.
I mean, or I would say, once you get to 20,
That's
it's
on the
unnecessary.
Yeah.
If you have 3 to 5 years of residency and you've established yourself in our community and you are self-employed, the other thing is there are many examples of self-employed people who have created local jobs by, you know, hiring assistants or being able to expand their business, not to mention the fact that that allows long-term residents to have a year-round income stream, which supports our economy in the winter. So like, to me, that is, there are many reasons why I firmly support 1 and would highly recommend no percentage requirement, because once you start getting down to 10 or 20%, like, what is it? It seems to me like writing on a page, and if you're going to end up excluding 2 or 3 people, what's the point? Like, they either meet the intent or they don't. That's my opinion on the matter.
So could you, I'm getting in the weeds, but could you do 5 years, 25% in 5 years residency and then 50% in 3 years, something like that?
Yeah,
Something-
that's not,
something
yeah, or then
Right.
0 after 10. You
Right,
know?
right, Yeah.
Sure, right? I mean, if you've been here for 5 years, 10 years,
Yeah.
and you've managed a small local business, you know,
Yeah.
and also with just the way that the internet
Okay,
has
that's
opened up
Yeah.
income streams,
Yeah.
so many people are turning to that.
Yeah.
This is
I agree.
themselves.
Okay, sounds good.
Another
So-
matrix.
And what?
Yeah,
Another
right.
matrix.
Another
Yeah.
matrix.
There's something to be said for simplicity too.
Yeah.
I would agree
understand.
with Jerry on that. I would personally just drop it to 0 at 5 years, but
Yeah.
I think if you wanted a scale, I think the scale can be simple in itself.
5 and 0 seems
Right.
to be a pretty good number.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Okay, that's great. So as far as, I do recall at the commission, there was concern among some of the commissioners that allowing remote workers at any level would be damaging to the original intent because it would possibly drive up the price of homes that we're selling, the HGHO units that would be sold, because remote workers are often able to afford a lot more than a local, even a self-employed remote worker. So that was a concern for sure. And then I think there was, you know, a ton of support for all around for a remote worker, for
No.
adding that in.
That's
in
my
general.
memory. Yeah.
I wonder how much the remote worker actually is even an issue. I mean,
what I'm
technically,
thinking too.
I'm a remote worker
Mhm.
and I'm not shopping for HDHO product.
Right, that's the thing. I think that at that point, you're able to afford just whatever is on the market. So,
Yeah, if your income is so high that you would push up the cost of this housing, you're not likely
Yeah.
to be buying. And
There also was the issue of people saying, well, I can work remotely now, where would I like to work? Let's go move to Moab and I can still have my Hewlett Packard job and work remotely. Is that who's to fill these
I think
slots?
that's the concern.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Is there any consensus for recommending that the commission consider the remote worker? Or is it just sort of general consensus? It's not the path to follow.
I
I mean,
guess.
I can make arguments why it could have merit, but I personally don't think it's the right path.
I think it's probably such a small number of people that it would apply to that it doesn't really make sense.
Probably not as big a priority as anything else. is
Yeah.
my opinion. So Why even put it in the mix?
To me, it's strong passion for bullet number one, and then number two is like Diet Vanilla Coke.
Yeah.
It's not diet regular.
Although I would say on number one, which we discussed, I think there's probably a range of views on
Yeah.
what the time limit is and what percent is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I think there's some merit considered.
Number one will take us an hour. Ish. Just, one. We're only gonna get through one at a time.
I do wonder if you put three options on the table.
Yeah,
And just
yeah.
immediately were like,
That'd be
pick your
great.
top two.
That's what I'm
And
thinking.
then debate
I
them.
think
We're
that-
at
I
that
think
point
that would
now
help.
where we could just put the options on
Yep.
the table.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Choose.
That'd be great.
Show the rationale.
That'll help.
On the stereo computer, 'cause I can't read the bottom.
So so the bottom one was to clarify whether or not accessory dwelling units should also be restricted to have to qualify as AEH, or if we should leave those as their ADUs traditional or are traditionally are used for local residents anyway. They sometimes are providing support to their family members, they're
Yeah.
providing support to the whatever workforce household that's there in the principal dwelling. So this one was also kind of, there was not consensus on it. It was kind of split.
I apologize that I'm not up to speed on this, but did we get a final opinion from the county lawyer, county attorney regarding the question of if you are qualified under ADH and own a home and you rent out your ADU to your parents who don't qualify, now 2/3 of the household are unqualified. What was the consensus there?
I think that each unit is considered, it needs to have its own household, so you wouldn't think of the property as a household altogether. That's what I remember.
I will say that since these are market rate homes and not like strictly low income, if having an apartment in the back that you can, bring your mom in for childcare, so you're not paying for childcare so that you can afford to live by your home, or there's, some local kids and, one of them works part-time as a river guide and the other works remotely, but they can rent your apartment and it helps you buy your home, it helps you afford your home and you qualify. If that is the mechanism, like affordable housing is produced on both sides of the market, creating the cost structure that allows for units to be priced low enough, but also raising incomes so that people can afford that baseline, especially with interest rates as they are. The cost of lending is so much higher. So if we
Would be a really
can,
good argument for
if we
this,
can
yeah.
increase your income just marginally by allowing you to rent out to people that, might not otherwise fully meet the bill, I mean, goodness, if it puts people in homes and brings these projects online, I strongly support it.
And Emily, there are some of the other situations you talked about, like family members. I think those are real good reasons to not have AEH requirement on that. So I can think of probably a handful of situations like that.
And the cost of childhood at the low end here is $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
And so when you think about if you're able to rent that house and cover the cost of childcare, bring in your mother, like your father, you can be in the workforce. You're not home with your kids. You can work, you can carry your own job and also, have some leisure time. So I strongly support it.
Yes.
What was the status of the new software that would track overnight rental advertisement?
Oh,
To
yeah.
rate that?
Yeah, so we do have access now to the software that we didn't realize we were still paying for. But we got that all figured out and we're working with them going forward. But we are grateful that we do have it because it's useful information, data that Josh is already pulling from their system and finding where there's illegal nightly rentals already, there's a handful of them. So we'll be able to actively enforce that now and it'll cover the ADUs, so
That's great.
helpful in that way.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yep. Do you guys have any comments on there about the ADU, AEH?
It's a hard one for me because I want every household occupied to be occupied by an actively employed household
Well,
in general, but I'm also kind of, I'm going to need to move my mother into an ADU at some point
Right.
in the next 20 years
right,
myself.
sure, right.
So I don't know what to do there, man. Like,
Yeah, it's tough. That's a tough one.
I think an exception for family members is like the minimum if we keep it,
Yeah,
in,
exactly.
you know?
Yeah,
We should probably think about this some more.
yeah, I agree. We should think about it.
I think my main thing is just not overnight rentals, which is
Yeah.
already accounted for in
It's
our
already
land use
covered.
code, so I'm not
Right.
really concerned about it.
Yep.
Okay, we just keep thinking about, we probably won't get to it. We'll see.
There's also something to be said, and sorry, I've lived in a lot of weird illegal ADUs in this town in
Me
the last
too.
10 years. And there's something to be said for like, I'm building an ADU, I'm going to move into it, I'm gonna open up 3 bedrooms in my house.
Yeah.
And that's like a major housing multiplier.
Yeah.
There's something entirely different.
Yeah.
When you're like bolting an air conditioner on the side of a tool shed with drywall screws and renting it, right? Which is
Yeah.
like,
I know.
you know,
But that wouldn't be permitted for occupancy, so it would be illegal, which we're not gonna
Right.
stop.
But that's what you're
No, but like,
talking
this,
Right.
this change to the ordinance is not gonna stop people from putting up illegal overnight rentals
Right.
and illegal long-term rentals. Like,
Yeah.
the two are,
Yeah.
we, if you're gonna put a air conditioning unit in a lawn shed, you're not attending planning commission meetings and understanding our local land use laws, or you just don't care. And so to me, like, to not support people who wanna go the right way and just need a little bit of extra bounce to afford a home,
Yeah,
like,
that's
let's focus on these folks.
kind of my thought here though is given those people that want to bolt an air conditioner on their tool shed an avenue to make it legal, that's a good thing to do too. And an ADU, which is-
If there's more rental
Yeah.
units on the market and people are like, I don't wanna live in your tool shed, I can afford that ADU over
Yeah,
there,
there you
that's a
go.
good thing too. Supply will weed out the bad, or demand will weed out the bad supply.
I think you're right, Tony, this could be a good housing multiplier, just like you talked about.
it could also like exacerbate our slumlord problem,
Well, okay.
which is a real problem.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that's a nice rental in this town, in case you guys didn't realize.
Can you expand on that? Like, I'm not challenging you at all, I just
I
like,
think that
I
would
don't-
be related to removing the requirement for primary occupancy to be one of the units. Then that would mean there's not the owner is not living in one of the units. But in this, for the HCHO, relative to HCHO, you're gonna have the primary, the property owner is gonna be.
if you have a illegal apartment, so I assume has to, maybe you are you doing on-site checks? Right, so
But it's mostly because at this point, we know what
Sure.
the stock
Right.
is.
So if somebody has, a backyard and they say, yeah, I've built an ADU, I'm gonna use it for when people come to visit in town and as a home office. Little do you know, they're renting it out as this slumlord thing, like, unless HASU is regularly going around and checking every single one of these units, which, given the number of illegal rentals right now in Spanish Valley, I'm assuming is not gonna happen. I just don't think the two they might be correlated,
I
but they are
mean,
not
they're-
causal in my.
What you just described to me sounds like exactly the reason why my fears are validated.
But they can build an ADU anyway. No one's saying you can only build an ADU if you promise to rent it out. They're saying, this would say, if you do rent it out, you have to rent it out to somebody who meets these characteristics. But somebody could circumvent that by building it and just saying nobody's living in it and lie. And I guess what I'm saying is like, in that case, why add the extra stress into the system to try and go in and double check that you're actually, like, people, the path to get around it is so wide open, and it's not the thing that's constraining our housing market. It's not the thing that's gonna cause the entire thing to fail, because a couple people might rent it to folks who don't, an apartment in your backyard to people who don't meet the strict requirements of AEH. And in removing that strict qualification, it actually can help more people the system is built for take advantage, meet the intent of the system. Like, logically, I think we're adding constraints that are unnecessary. They add loopholes we're gonna have to figure out how to close, and they don't fix the dilemma.
I would also just say, I don't think there's a very large number of properties and units that actually would
Right.
have
They would apply to
ADUs,
it.
whether that's like a lack of land space or,
Or
we
yeah.
have so many apartment buildings and townhouses and homes.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, there's like
Doesn't apply to much.
one unit that we know that's HCHO on the market that's specifically ADU, and right now, that's the only one that it applies to, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah, there's only really Peakview that's doing like single family homes
Mm-hmm.
and some of
Yeah.
the other smaller ones that were doing those, but.
yeah, and there's the Starbucks one right now that's been
Right.
on the market.
But yeah, like Desert
So-
Soul is all townhomes, very, like, very.
Yeah, Murphy
compact.
Flats, you can't.
There's no way they
you
would
know?
fit. in there.
I think it's just a really, a pretty niche
That's
um,
true. That's a good
circumstance.
point, Laura.
in general, but that's just.
Which would be a point towards simplification for the people who could benefit.
Right,
from
that's
like
what
a
I'm
family
saying,
member.
yeah, her, yeah,
The Starbucks one's still on the market. Do you know the price of that?
I just checked, $750.
That
That's
wasn't reflected on our chart.
That one's been online for like a
Yeah,
year.
wow. Yeah, it's, I knew it was super high.
Oh, my goodness.
That's, yeah, never mind. I'll keep my mouth shut.
So where do we stand on this? I bet you if we took a straw poll, I mean, I guess the question is, should the ADU have to be an AEH thing? I'd be willing to straw poll on it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Would
that's
you
a
like to
great
make
idea.
put a straw poll on the table?
Sure. How many are in favor of it only being an AEH occupancy for the ADU units?
With the exception for family members.
With the exception for family members.
And would that be, would you say, Hobie, that would be both the ADU and the house?
No,
The house is already.
house has to be occupied.
Yeah, owner occupied.
Owner
Yeah,
occupied.
so
But not
only be the
ADU.
ADU. Or, well,
So-
it doesn't- yeah, the owner doesn't have to, I mean, I guess you could, in Tony's example of somebody moving into the ADU and then renting out the house, that would mean that all of the occupants in that HGHO primary residence would have to qualify under HASU. And then the,
Yep.
and then the ADU could just be the owners.
I've had a few friends tell me that they would like to do that if
That's,
that's
yeah, and that's what I did with mine. I live in my ADU, yeah.
the case.
So we had one who would require AEH occupancy for ADUs with a family member exception. Who would not require it?
I'm just gonna.
And
Who is
who's
undecided?
okay.
And who is
So,
undecided?
Of the five,
Yeah,
of the
undecided.
five residents, majority for not requiring, one against with an exception, and one on the fence.
That- I guess I'd qualify that in saying, I think we need more discussion or,
Sure.
yeah, about exactly
Yeah.
how to word this.
Yeah, I think if it was, if one of the units was required to be owner occupied, it'd be a lot more immediate for me.
Well, the main house-
Doesn't the owner
Well, at least
have
it's
to
saying
be?
it's not necessarily.
Well, through the HGHO by default, one of the units
what I thought,
has to be owned
Yeah.
by HGH. The property
Yeah.
itself has to be owned by an HGH, by an AEH,
Yes.
qualified by HASU.
So you
Yes.
couldn't have a second homeowner who buys a house, lives in the ADU and rents out the home, because as an owner, they would have to meet the AEH requirements. This
Yeah.
only would create a situation where somebody could qualify and live in the house and rent an ADU to somebody who's not qualified. Somebody who's qualified could live in the ADU and create space for additional qualified people, but it doesn't flip the other way because of that ownership requirement on the
Yeah.
land itself.
So what was the hesitation then for it not being required for ownership? Because a couple times I got brought up and then you were like, well, not necessarily.
I don't recall.
I just didn't, like, I thought that was my understanding, but then you were like, oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I can't recall exactly where my brain was going with that, but you were right, you clarified it. So
Okay,
no matter what, the property has to be purchased by an AEH, so therefore.
but they're not
always
required to
be
live
owned.
in the house?
Technically, no, you can purchase it and then you can move out and you can rent it to, under a
AEH.
current rule.
Yes, I know the
Yeah, you
AEH part,
can-
yes.
You could rent it to somebody who's, AEH qualified.
Yeah.
And so the occupant would always have to be AEH, but it also has to be owned by AEH. They don't necessarily have to live there though.
Yes.
And that's what Trish is saying. She lives in the carriage house and, or the, cargo unit.
Shipping.
Shipping unit, yeah.
I think where I was going was under our previous discussion about ADUs and whether or not to deed restrict them for one of the units being necessary for, or required to be occupied by the owner,
Yes.
and how that relates to what we're talking about here. that's where my brain was kind of like, having a little glitch.
Laura, if it's feasible, I think it would also be helpful, if HASU had this estimate, what it would take to enforce. Like, would this additional level enforcement be reasonable, giving existing HASU staffing and things?
I think
like
that would be a county question because the county is the one who contracts HASU. I think it would involve more money.
Yeah.
So there's that too.
More staff.
I don't know.
For more service. Yeah.
Create a job.
Well, that's why I have my job.
Well,
But.
yeah, more
I'll take a
complexity in
raise.
this system. Let's,
But yeah.
so just to kind of put a pin in it, so, point A, if staff could have 3 recommendations to put in front of the commission to move the conversation forward, where, you know, option 1 is maybe 25% in 5 years, maybe option 2 is that graduated, you know, 50 at 3, 25 at 5, 0 at 10, and then option 3 is this just no percentage requirement. I think that would move that part forward. There's general consensus, it sounds like bullet 2 is not recommended by the planning commission, that is a remote worker only company that's not here. And then you have our straw poll for
Great.
option 3.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Cool. Great. Can we move on?
Yeah, so I was just gonna review again the next steps here. We'll do that. We'll provide a red line draft to you all at the next meeting for discussion. We'll bring that also to the county commission for discussion with those options embedded into the land use code red line version. And then, of course, legal review and then public hearings. Okay.
Moab area affordable housing master plan, goal setting.
All right, so we decided to bring this to you all for just kind of an informal discussion. At this point, Laura and Noel have been really taking the lead and wrapping up, trying to bring some completion to the Moab area housing master plan. Moab area affordable housing plan update. And so they put together some goals, and I'll kind of pass it on to you guys if you want to bring this discussion.
Yeah. We have, I don't know if they went around the table or not, but just a printout version of what we have on the screen.
And it's a lot of words, so I think what we'll start with today is just give a brief timeline of where the housing plan is at right now, and then just a little bit of an explanation of this document specifically. And we recently met with Elisa and Corey of the city to really talk through these goals, but essentially, housing plan, we've been working on it for, you know, over a year, and it's almost done. But kind of the last piece of it, other than just like edits and data collection, is really focusing on strategic acts and guidance that we can provide, because this document is adopted by both the city and the county. And obviously, like on both ends of the spectrum, city and county, we're having conversations about improving affordable housing, but really having a backbone by like this document is super important. Not to mention, in this plan, we did kind of a complete overhaul of data, and we realized that like the data collection is super imperative to be able to tell how effective our affordable housing, like land use code changes and ordinances actually are. So that was, I think that's also been a big learning experience, and I'm grateful that both planning departments like definitely support the need for more structured data collection, which, as Noel and I found through a lot of murky data and whatnot. So anyways, I can click on this action plan super quickly, but we created a bunch of steps that kind of fit 4 categories regarding affordable housing, which is supply, stability, sustainability, and subsidy. I won't go through all of these because there's a lot of them, but essentially these are more so like actions that we are recommending to the bodies of how we can improve affordable housing or like hit targets, right? And so we have that But those are more so just guidance. And what we are finding really important is to actually create like quantifiable goals that work in tandem with both the cities and the counties' specific needs, situations, whatnot. So, yeah, like I said, we met with Corey and Elisa a couple weeks ago, and the rest of the planning staff. Some of these bullet points are a little old, but we really just wanted to provide this to the planning commission now, to read through kind of what our ideas are in terms of how are these tracked and how are they going to be measurable. Because that's, I think, what we're struggling, like what Moab is lacking right now is actually effective ways to quantify our goals. And then the last thing I'll say about this is Corey and Elisa, and if planning commission folks have specific comments and things that they want to see, we're going to come up with kind of a final document of this, and it will be plugged into the draft housing plan. And then I guess it's almost July. So at the end of July, the housing task force is planning on having a public workshop where we'll run through a full draft of the entire plan. So I'll have you there, but also we will be bringing it to this planning commission, the city planning commission, and then eventually, which I think it'll be in August, bring it to county and city to get it finally adopted. So that's kind of what the timeline is looking like. Theoretically, it will be out of our hands in August, but this is mostly like the last big piece that we have other than little copy edits and again, just having like a temperature check with the housing task force through a public workshop in July. So details on that. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not necessarily, just that, yeah, we put together this whole plan and did so much work collecting data and everything. And then we said, how is this going to actually be used? And I think the idea of having goals with teeth, that at some point, if the planning commission comes up with a policy, something like pretty aggressive for affordable housing, and you bring it to the county commission, and there's some pushback, it's just a way of pointing and saying, you committed to these goals of creating this many affordable homes, this many deed restricted homes, and this policy will help you achieve that goal. That's kind of what we are trying to provide in this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it kind of is in the context too of this being part of our general plan. So it's going to be adopted as an amendment to our general plan, which, you know, we're trying always to get a more robust general plan, and the chapters in there gradually we're revising and bringing them into so that we can actually use them and use those planning ideals and roadmap for making policy and getting things adopted at the commission. I would also say that the other context for these goals specifically is that we've always talked about wanting to create a dashboard on our website for tracking housing goals and affordable housing specifically. And so these would all kind of go towards creating and developing that dashboard where we have like 4 different things that we could be updating continually, like monthly, you know, on a monthly basis or something. So, yeah.
So I apologize that we didn't get this to you all earlier, but maybe just based on a quick read, if there are any comments or.
I have a quick question about primary residence, because I haven't actually seen this figure. I've seen this 1.4 thing, which is about overnight rentals. A non-primary resident would consist of a secondary home or one that's kind of rented. Are they both in that category?
A primary residency, this is all based on the assessor's office data.
Okay.
So primary residency is like strictly a tax thing, and
Yes.
it's, you spend 183 consecutive days in this residence. And then also for Grand County, if you have your vehicles registered here, if you're registered to vote, there's like a whole checklist. And then you can apply for primary residency, so you only pay 55% of
Yes.
your property income.
This is
taxes.
the income tax.
Yeah, exactly. And property tax.
Property tax on that, yes.
And so then secondary residences are any residence that isn't a primary residence, or if it is a rental property, a long-term rental property, then the landlord can apply for primary residency if the tenant, if that's their primary residence. So if they can prove that whoever's living and renting in the home doesn't have another property someplace else, like that is their stable primary residence, then that also counts.
So they're all part of that 67%.
Yes, yeah,
And everything else is secondary.
could be vacant homes, could be second homes, could be short-term rent, all short-term rentals fall into the secondary residence
Right.
category.
And this is only for residential properties, so the reason that's
Right,
different.
not
for the-
hotels.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
include the commercial
got that.
hotel
Yeah.
properties, so that's why,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the only thing I'd be curious about, I know, for example, in Jackson, Wyoming, there is a preponderance of primary residences that people don't actually reside in because they take advantage of the tax structure of Wyoming.
Right.
And they register to vote there and they pay their primary resident taxes there, and then they live in one of their other 8 homes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that is an issue here yet, but I can imagine it being one, especially with that friendly tax structure. I think for, especially in terms of stability, vacancy rates by month per home is far more compelling to me as an actual indicator of health than simply the ownership structure.
The thing with residency at least is the only data that we can find that's like somewhat accurate and regular is census data. And that's just updated once a year through whatever ACS stands for, the community survey.
Community survey.
I guess I
Yeah.
would just be mindful then, it's very easy for metrics to become the thing that drives decision-making as opposed to being the thing that measures decision-making.
Mhm.
I would sure hate for this to become something that people seek as a goal when it's really the stability of long-term occupancy and not simply ownership that is ultimately the goal. So however that feeds into your strategies that relate to these, I would love to see that explicitly called out.
Yeah, and I think primary residency isn't going to be like the only goal. Like we
Sure,
have other ones that are focused on increasing the number of deed restrictions or
Yeah.
income restricted housing. So it's all, it kind of hits different segments of the housing stock.
I wonder if through, and you kind of get to this, but I wonder if through that same census data, there is a way to capture of those primary residences, what percentage of, based off of property tax rates, what percentage of the home value sits within the affordability range of the average worker. So it's not just about what's on the market or the average cost of homes sold, but if property tax rates are reflecting the, real market rate of real estate, even if that real estate is not being sold, it would be a proxy to understanding home size and things like that, if you can't capture vacancy. So just like, leading indicators is potential.
Yeah.
I also, under considerations, having said, I'd be mindful of how to use these metrics. I do think the more aggressive the goal, I'd far rather we set ambitious goals, fail to meet them, but force ourselves to understand why, than to have less ambitious goals that we meet and, navel gaze, look, we did it and a bunch of people are still hurting.
That was definitely a conversation that we were kind of having of how aggressive do we want to make this? Do we want to stick to the status quo? Because so the 2017 plan and also this plan, it has needs projections that are kind of created by a model, which, isn't the most accurate, but it's certainly like a stepping stone, a benchmark. And technically based on those projections, we've met increasing the housing stock by the number that we wanted from 2017 to now. But we all know, because we're in the housing realm, that so much of that stock either went to secondary homes or luxury homes. And obviously it's not in line with the general scope of housing that we're truly needing in the community. So that's a conversation that we've also been having. Right now, it feels like some of the only ways that we're actually able to target and also quantify affordability is through the deed restricted properties that we're able to understand, but would be really open to figuring out other ways to go about that as well.
One more data point that I'm thinking back to my econ analysis days. I don't know if this would be something in the census or if it would be available in our small region, is commute times. So if you can track the,
That is on
is it?
census.
I don't know if it's
Yeah.
ACS, but it's census. If we can capture commute times, you know, that has the benefit of telling us, if the average worker is being pushed further from the city center due to affordability, that's also a negative indicator of health. And so we should aim to at least retain, if not decrease, commute times, which again, can be offset both by making more housing available closer to the city center, but also offsetting generally automobile transportation with mass transit and other means, which can decrease commute time in its own way, or at least provide alternative means. I think my biggest concern, no, I have so many concerns. A concern that I have is that, you know, residences for workers will continue to get pushed further and further into the valley or into other counties, which has the impact both of taking people further from amenities of their own community, but also has the effect of increasing cost of living for our core workforce at the, you know, benefit, quote unquote, of people who don't work here. So would love to see that.
I think that could also kind of tie into having a goal of increasing infill development specifically in the city, which is definitely like a conversation that's being had among, like Corey was really talking about. It's interesting because we, you know, city and county like align obviously on increasing affordable housing, but we're both going to be going about it in different ways. So like that's definitely an avenue that I think they're going to start looking into is further restricting zoning / other incentives, especially like for infill development. So anyways.
I didn't look through all of these, but do you have a goal here for infill development?
We do, it is written down in the supply section. We haven't quantified it yet. That's kind of like the filling in part that we're gonna be looking into more so with the planning staff.
Yeah, because we are able to track at least ADU construction through building department, like C of O letters and stuff.
Right.
So we do have data on ADUs specifically, so that could be a goal of ours. And I think something else that Laura brought up, like the differences in situation between the city and the county, there was some talk about creating different goals for the city and the county. So we would adopt a certain set of goals, they would adopt a certain set of goals where like the idea would be the same, but maybe the numbers would be different because just like the reality is there's a lot
We're
more
different.
developable land in the county.
And we have
than in the city.
different housing stock,
Yeah.
diversity and all of that too,
Mhm.
so, yeah, that was where that was coming from.
Yeah, and one of the things that we are floundering a little bit on is the sustainability section in terms of like a quantifiable goal where the city has they're working on their sustainability plan and they have a lot more quantifiable goals in terms of water usage and things like that, but we don't necessarily have that at the county level.
This is so in addition to looking at Moab City, I've been researching Tucson's sustainability program, and they have some very interesting, obviously much larger scale, but the way that they track per capita water use over time, open space to commercial and residential transfer, things like that, surface porosity, you know, all of those are really interesting metrics. Also, back to the transportation question, in addition to commute times, round trip miles by transportation mode, I think is also in the census. Or it's certainly available through
Yeah.
various think tanks. And, you know, maintaining a less than certain percentage of round trip automobile, or, you know, motorized vehicle versus other modes would also be a good signal indicator.
I think especially for the county, that would be a really great measure to get started.
See the goal for deed restricted units, and I think we just had a conversation about that. About, you know, my preference would be to handle that via other means. I think deed restriction kind of scares buyers off and probably scares builders off too.
So the nice thing about deed restrictions is they're a bit more encompassing than just
They
single
are.
family homes. So like, this is also, when we say deed restriction, and we can definitely define this better, but we essentially mean units that are restricted by occupancy or income. So that includes HCHO, that
Okay.
includes like the LIHTC projects that Hasu's building, that includes like a wide breadth, so.
When I think about deed restriction, I
Yeah.
think about something else.
Totally, yeah, so we can certainly
Yeah, it
make that a
scares,
bit approachable, because it is.
yeah, I think, yeah, that'd be a suggestion then, is to clarify that and put it in maybe put it in the way that, yeah, basically points out that that doesn't necessarily mean.
I like that. I think that would be good to incorporate some language in the housing plan, just to break down the real impact of those deed restrictions and what they are and why not to be so scared of them.
Yeah, I think we actually have kind of changed that language like in the
Yeah.
last couple of weeks since.
good.
Changing it more to like
this, yeah.
income and occupancy
There you go.
restrictions, and that encompasses like
Yeah,
actual formal legal deed restrictions, as well as like public housing projects that you have to have a certain income to qualify. So,
Or like the ADH requirements in the city.
yeah.
I want to jump off of this point. I know some communities are offering, or not offering, or have like kind of a template and are encouraging people in their communities to voluntarily restrict their properties for income or otherwise. My partner and I are planning to do that personally. And I think it's kind of a cool thing that some communities do, where you have some kind of incentivized situation where where property owners can choose like, okay, I'm gonna deed restrict my property to only be able to accrue this much value per year or something, or, whatever it is, but obviously you guys probably know more about it than me, so just curious if that's part of that conversation as well, or if that's kind of out of the scope.
Talk about it. I know like Hasu, myself and Ben, we've always been really interested in like, when we have capacity to kind of take on a project like that, some sort of voluntary deed restriction, like pilot program, so it's definitely in the works. I think we could certainly add it into.
I think it's something, I seem to recall Caitlin talking about how this has been part of the discussion, like the past 5 years probably. And it's come up again and again, whether it's just a voluntary program or if it's like a deed purchasing program, where you get like actual money for the amount that you would lose in home value, that sort of thing.
Right.
I think it's been talked about a lot. I think it'd be really.
But I do
Yeah.
think there's enough of a demand, or not even demand, but like desire, like you and I know a lot of other folks in the community, just like anecdotally that are like super down for that. So I think that's definitely, whether it's in this plan or like, separately, like Hasu has definitely had our eyes on that for a long time too.
I think it's I was actually, and this is an aside, but not, I was out at a ranch in the Book Cliffs on Friday with Department of Ag, looking at conservation easement on a ranch, and that was really what he was selling to those individuals, that overall you are going to lose probably half the value of your ranch by doing this, but you're doing it for the good of the land, you're doing it for the sustainability of this into perpetuity, and so I do think that there are a lot of individuals that would pursue it.
Yeah, I mean, we've
for
been
sure.
waiting, I mean, I don't need to get too far into it, but like we were talking with Caitlin when she was at the city, and we're talking with Jenna.
He'd
when
be
she was at
ready to do it
Hasu.
tomorrow.
Like, we were like, you wanna do this? And they're
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
here's the thing, so, yeah.
Right.
I think it probably won't fit into the timeline of this plan, but just because we're trying to get this wrapped up. I mean, something we could mention is like a
Long-term goal.
Yeah, a long-term goal, but
It actually might be an action.
I mean, I know there was like a point with economic development where they were gonna maybe have funds,
Had a lot of those conversations.
the
with
deed
August
restriction
and-
purchase program for like using some of the rural county grant funds, or maybe it was TRT.
I think it was.
And then maybe that got squashed. but-
Yeah.
I don't think it's out of the running yet. I think they still have more money.
It's okay. Yeah, they were talking about a pilot program that would do that exact thing and actually help. It would, I think it was modeled after maybe what Vail is doing and where they were helping out with the down payment for where they would get involved in a transaction. But like, if you're not selling your home and you just wanted to deed restrict, maybe there would be some flat rate incentive or something that could be part of that.
So it's nearing 5 after. We do citizens to be heard at 6. Let's put a pin on this conversation. If there's any additional comments that anyone has been holding, now's your chance. Otherwise, we'll do citizens to be heard, that last future consideration, and then move on.
Yeah, I think just as we are formulating these goals, like take this piece of paper home. And if you have other thoughts, like do let us know. Especially if you're like, oh, this metric would be great
Yeah.
to start tracking, or how would you do this? Yeah, just shoot us an email because and we'll be back. Yeah.
Can't get rid of you.
It's actively wrapping up. I have
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
I'm very excited for the final version
Yeah.
and just seeing it through. So, and thank you both for being so
Will this
diligent.
look a little bit like, I mean, I'm gonna say, way back when Zechariah was here, there was a whole list of things like how many houses were available at certain prices, how many would we need?
Yeah,
It's gonna have all that, yeah, that's
Yeah, we're
a great
having-
update then.
Yeah, we're having a local layout person, a friend in town, like doing the formatting and editing and everything of the plan, so it'll look nice and polished and have good like data and graph availability for everybody. So.
There was a page in one of the 2 draft economic plans back in 2019. That it seared in my brain, and it showed images of different people in our community, like a single mom, a younger couple, a fireman, and a teacher. And it showed the number of units that had been sold in the last year that any of them could afford to purchase. And it was like 0.0001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was so powerful. And not that I think this needs any selling in terms of like the impact, but
Yeah,
We-
just that's the concept.
we
of
do
that
have-
data.
It doesn't have pictures of people necessarily, but we actually have a graphic that says like, based on the average wage for this profession, how many people it would require in a household in order to be able to afford the average house or
Yeah.
the median house. And it's like, if you're in food service or accommodations, you need more than 4 people in
Yeah.
your house and that sort of thing. So
it's,
we do have some of that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Any other comments? Thank you. Well done.
Yeah.
All right. 6:07, is there anyone here to speak during the second citizens to be heard? Okay, they're all gonna come off mute. I can't see anything. Oh, it's Mark. You can come off mute. We can't hear you if you're speaking.
There we go. Took me a little while. Can you hear me now? Tell me you can hear me.
Yes.
You can hear me, right?
Yep.
All right, my comments tonight concern item number 2 on the agenda, the status of various land use code updates. I've been very frustrated to know that a property in my neighborhood was targeted for the proposed MFR 45. And I'm very relieved to find out tonight that the developer has decided not to seek funding. And so you can, what's the word you used? Stall discussion on the MFR 45. I'm very grateful for that. I'm skeptical. In fact, I'm almost certain that it's not a good idea to kowtow to developers to solve our housing problems into the future. I think they'll be creating problems into the future. Take, for example, the developer for the property in my neighborhood, the church property, I think you know the one I'm talking about, on Boulder Avenue, 1.34 acres. He seemed to need 45 per. And so that's what's driving the discussion on MFR 45. I think I'd like to see that reassessed. I think it's a poor precedent to set to allow developers to drive the housing market into the future. I've found it frustrating to know that a number of citizens gathered down at OSTA some time back and decided that it would probably be best to start MFR 45 down near the town center. I've heard that a lot, and I think that's just a way of Spanish Valley residents trying to protect their rural community character at the expense of ours. I think you might consider how the future is going to develop strongly down at the south end of town. And in fact, the hundreds and hundreds of unsupervised overnight rentals that San Juan County is building, are they going to build housing for their workers, or is Grand County going to suffer that in the future? I think it's I think it's wrong for precedent to be set by an overlay zone. For example, I've heard Ms. Martin say that the higher building height proposed for MFR 45 of 42 feet, that a precedent was set by allowing it in HDHO. No. If you were allowing, I think you get what I'm saying there. Otherwise, you're just going to keep setting precedents. I think you're putting the cart before the horse. And in fact, I think the cart is careening down the hill and the horse has gone back to the barn.
This takes us to the 3 minutes we generally do for citizen
Excuse me.
comment.
Did you just say I'm at 3 minutes already?
Yeah, it started at 6:08.
I wonder why we are in this problem right now. I'll close with this, but I'm going to try and write this in a letter because it's difficult to, and besides, it doesn't go anywhere if you just make public comment. But mistakes made by planning commissions and county commissions of the past have gotten us in this situation. For example, housing all along the South Highway 191 that are all overnight rentals, unsupervised overnight rentals. They should be houses for people. Rim Village should be houses for people, shouldn't they? And while you're giving away special dispensation of 45, why aren't you considering the water? Do you think you're going to compensate for the extreme gift of water to people by making sure that their lawns are zero-scape? No, I don't think so.
Okay. That gets
Good
us-
luck to us all.
Thank you, Martin. Is anyone else here to speak during citizens to be heard? Okay. I see the hand, was the hand raised accidental? Just hasn't been, but yeah. Okay. Bring my glasses to the next meeting. All right. Thank you very much. So the only remaining future consideration I had brought up was the question of glamping as a land use, which we had started to look at and we discussed, and I think personally, I think it makes a lot of sense. I'd like to see that come back. Does anyone have any concern with asking staff to prior to somehow? Maybe.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know, yeah, but it's just water correlated with that, et cetera, and so on.
I would like really nuanced definitions for glamping as land use. Can't just be like, oh, they have fancy books.
Right.
That's what we're discussing right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
sure.
we're talking about bringing it back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all aggregated into campaign right now.
Somewhere.
Okay.
We started working on that.
Yeah, we did.
Somewhere there's a draft.
But meaning like other communities.
Yeah, it absolutely
Right.
should be parsed out from other kinds of camping, particularly with the use of power and water.
Yeah, exactly.
So why don't
Yeah,
we,
100%.
why don't we include that in the staff update to the county commission along with the Article 3 question? And if there's no significant, if there's consensus for planning and zoning to move forward, let us know what it looks like in terms of your schedule.
Yeah, timeline wise.
It's something where we could even start to loosely workshop some language in our public meetings.
That'd be great.
So that, as you're wrapping up this housing stuff, we can launch into that in September.
Yeah, I don't need to tell Tony this, but that those types of developments require a lot of resources, not just water, but we know that the one in Zion has a helipad, they're just,
The one by
You know.
the has a pool.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're $600 a night, these individuals have the amount of money to have quite a large impact. So,
I was gonna ask Tony if those were the two big concerns, power and water, but it sounds like we're all on track for a whole lot more.
Just, road impact.
Yeah,
noise.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Density.
there's a lot.
So, all right, well, great. Well, I think that's a good way to move that forward. Any other future considerations?
I have one just quick transportation planning, future consideration. There's 2 items. So just a quick heads up that we're working with the city, and we, meaning Bill Jackson mainly, is working with the city on applying for the Safe Streets for All grant. Again, we did that last year, but we weren't successful in getting awarded any funds. And last year we had applied for implementation funding, so for actual projects and structure, the construction. And that, I guess, is extremely more competitive than going for the planning funding. And so we do already have our UTMP, right? But what we would be looking at right now in this grant is focusing on specific areas that we've identified in the UTMP for improvements, but then getting down to more of a focus like concept design and action plan for the construction of whatever was identified in the UTMP. And the focus would be on the Mill Creek Drive corridor, and then the connections along that route, as well as Spanish Valley Drive and Spanish Trail corridors. So those were kind of the main areas that we pulled out from the UTMP to focus on the supplemental action plans / concept designs. So that's going to be coming forward. We're actually kind of on a quick timeline because the grant application is due July 10th. So luckily the city has a grant writer, so they've been working and doing a lot of it already. And we're just going to be partnering with them. So that's coming online. And then I did want to say to you on that, once we get a little bit more detail, flesh out kind of what this grant money could be used for, we could maybe use some feedback from you all on what those kind of projects and design would be looking like and what we need. And then the other thing is UDOT just announced the public comment period for their long-range transportation plan that is now available for review and public comment. So that plan details rural Utah's anticipated transportation needs for 2023 through 2050 and includes a list of proposed projects on state routes to address the outlined needs. The public is encouraged to voice their input on the plan and the proposed projects, through July 25th of 2023. So only about a month is the public comment period. The plan is available for review at udot.input.utah.gov/udot-planning. And we're going to have links and the whole flyer that they provided up on our social media sites and circulate that, and then also on Grand County Connects. So I just want to get the word out and let everybody know that it would be great to provide some feedback, and maybe at our next meeting, we could even look at the plan and have some discussion on that.
Do they have a mechanism for a planning commission to give feedback?
I don't know. I wonder.
And would that
I
carry
would-
I
over?
would think we would be able
It's
to
like,
write a letter,
It's
kind
like
of.
the county commission does on all these
Mhm.
plans. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree with that.
I guess if we saw something concerning,
Right.
maybe it'd carry a little bit more weight than a half a dozen or a dozen
Mhm.
Yeah.
individual.
That's a great idea.
If I don't know, if you want to check with Chris and the county attorney about it and just make sure.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
okay.
Cool. I will try to be in person at the next meeting, but most likely I will be nursing myself back to health following the Taylor Swift concert, but I will be online present if nothing else.
I will be in desolation. I can't make it.
Good
So
for you.
Tony will be gone and you'll be online.
I'll be online.
So if, could just let us know as soon as possible so we can arrange for, digital forum if needed.
I've been a busy summer.
I will also
Yeah.
be online.
Great, so
Isn't July?
I mean,
10th, is
play
that the
back to
ADO?
COVID.
It's on July
Yeah.
10th. is the
July
ADO.
10th has the ADO public hearings. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Or, yeah, so that's an important one. We need to be able to have a quorum for.
So we can have a quorum digitally. I'm gonna try and arrange back
Yeah.
to be here for other reasons as well, but we will at least have 3, 4 digitally / in person, and then possibly Steve and Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Motion to get out of here. All in favor? All right. I think theoretically a voice vote gets the job done, but here we are.
Mikhail, hop over here.
Okay. Share it, sir.
Oh, the 14th.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I'm so excited.
Emily,